We're going to kick off with Mondelez, which is actually a company that has been with us at our Insider Summits for a number of years. Very early on, this company recognized the importance of data to drive its more direct relationships with consumers and to use digital channels to get to them. But in recent years especially, they've been on a kind of multi-year journey towards both building first-party data troves, but also learning how to best use it for building brand loyalty. That evolution from personalization, which it's been working on for the last several years, towards what the company is now calling empathy at scale, is the story that John Halvorson is here to tell. John is Global VP Consumer Experience at Mondelez. He's a veteran of CPG, of platforms, and from agencies. You may know John from previous roles leading video strategy at Twitter, but he also had a storied career at Publicis and OMD. Let me bring John in. Where do we find you today, John?
Here in Dumbo, Brooklyn.
Ah, good for you. So you're chilly too.
It is cold out there. It is cold.
I know empathy at scale takes a good deal of explanation, so I'm going to get out of your way and let you take over because I know we've got some great ideas to work from here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure and just an honor to get a chance to come here and present to you guys, having attended many of your summits in the past and certainly sharing a stage with many of my great peers over the next few days. So look, as we talked about, our journey has been a multi-year journey, and I kind of wanted to talk about it, all the lessons we've learned, because I think one of the things is sometimes you sit down and you see sessions and you see the wow and the amazing part of it, but you don't see everything that went on that journey. And so today, one of my goals is to try and just give back to so many of my peers who have given so much to me by talking about what really that journey was. And really, our journey started back in 2017. When we first started on our journey, we looked down and we saw the growth that we wanted to have as a CPG organization. And we realized that the tried and true methods of how we had ultimately built brands and gone to market were going to lead to low single-digit gains. They weren't going to create the growth that we needed. And so the simple idea of taking one mass message, producing as cheaply as possible, and just maximizing reach and sharing it to as many people as possible ultimately was not going to be what on the future. And so we launched a simple idea around personalization at scale. And ultimately, personalization at scale was the ability to combine technology and data to uniquely connect with consumers at heroic volume. And in that idea, we started out doing a lot of tests. Working across all of our BUs around the world, we launched hundreds of tests. And what we saw quite quickly and quite clearly was that year over year, if we did personalization versus non-personalization, we were gaining stronger ROIs. And obviously our quality of execution varied, our ideas varied, our strategy varied, the brands varied, the markets varied, but consistently we got a higher marketing ROI and thus greater effectiveness when we did personalized marketing. And so we knew we were onto something. There was something to this idea. We had debunked the myth that CPGs just had to produce one ad and send it to as many people as possible, and that's how you grew a mass brand. And through those pilots, we also learned a lot of other lessons that have informed where we're going. And really, there's kind of four things that I would share with this group as you're going on this lesson of things we learned on our journey in personalization. The first one is it's important to put people ahead of personas. Certainly in CPG, we benefit from a wealth of understanding of consumers. Our INA organizations are some of the best in the world, the envy of many of our peers in other categories. And we know a lot, but often sometimes we get caught up in our own personas. We start talking about some fictitious groups, and we don't really get to that human insight. And so ultimately what we found is when we put segmentation too far forward in the process, we ended up with ideas that just weren't powerful, that got broken down and were small. And so we've been really focused on how we put people ahead of those personas. Second, don't personalize brands to bland. Often you see this a lot in some of our executions. And when we first got started, we got very enamored with the volume of ad sets that we could create. It was very easy for us to go from an area of having one asset to hundreds of assets, to tens of thousands of assets, to hundreds of thousands of assets, to almost infinite number of assets. But a lot of that work, and if you do personalization rather mindlessly, you really get to a very bland place. ultimately, I think probably we've all experienced this, where your creative work looks like a series of Getty shoots, where you've just swapped in a different actor. There's nothing that really speaks to it. And ultimately, you're scaling the number of assets, but you're not scaling the empathy and the connection that you have with the consumer. Third is that quality is more important than volume. This really builds off of the last point, but I think is really important on its own. And that's that really the quality of the execution that you have. And really where this really came home to me is I was having a conversation with one of my creative agencies, VCCP UK, and we were having dinner in London. And I was just really frustrated about, why weren't we getting to the creative ideas that we wanted? What was really getting in the way? And we banged our heads together and we were just talking about what were the challenges were. And a large part of it is that we were just so focused on the volume and so focused on what was possible that we weren't thinking about the quality of that connection. And in our desire to be so one-to-one, we missed some really big opportunities that could be unlocked just even going and still talking to large groups and caring more about the quality and the production rather than just how many people we could get to and how one-to-one we could be. And the fourth is that true open collaboration is critical. I think this is something we did well and you can kind of consistently see in our work, but doing personalization the right way really requires marketing teams to work together with tech partners, creative, media agencies. It's a very collaborative process. And to do a lot of the work that we did in personalization, we've had to rewire our entire brand building model. Everything from how we think about brand foundations to how we build activation plans has been changed so that we think about and put things in the right sequence to drive a collaborative model. It's required us to think about putting production more at the table as we're thinking about creative ideas. It's required us to think about media in its right place and also just find the right place and roles for marketers, tech teams, digital COEs, and still just without having too big of a room. But that collaboration becomes really critical to getting to the work that you want to. And so, ultimately, our journey has really paid off, but we think that it's time to go a step further. And what we would introduce and kind of we shared internally last year, and now I guess today, or the first time taking to a larger audience, is our vision for what we think personalized marketing should be on a bigger scale. And we call this empathy at scale. It's about how we ultimately can write the right message to the right consumer at the right time. I'm going to introduce a video that's going to show the journey that we've been on, what we see as those differences, and then we'll talk more about it after the video. So, first of all, just before I jump back in, I just want to make sure I thank Ogilvy and Mather for all the work they did in putting that video together and helping us kind of codify our vision over that larger piece. So, if you're ever going to do a transformational change as a client, make sure you have one hell of an agency. And I definitely have one to think about and be my thought partner on this journey. So look, we wanted to put together one slide that really talks about what this is. And this is really about how do we go from personalization at scale, which was really led by data and technology, to think about how we would ultimately segment and uniquely connect with consumers at a heroic volume, to really thinking about what we do in empathy at scale, which is all about the right connection between you and a brand that is right for you at the moment for you. And that transformation, I think, is kind of best shown in this chart, which kind of talks about what our larger journey was. If you would have looked back at us from 2012 to 2017, you would have seen that we, like most CPG marketers, were a mass marketer. Our focus was in communication. We focused on big ideas. We were targeting everyone who had a mouth. Media was a megaphone for us to talk to the world, and we were very much focused and video oriented. As we moved into personalization at scale from 2017 to 2020, things changed. We started to care about how we would engage with consumers. Our ideas got a little fragmented as we ultimately segment and sequence to very specific audiences. We didn't have one big idea, but often creating smaller ideas we served to different groups. We talked about people in terms of clusters. Our message was customized. Media we saw as a platform for us to share, and our focus was very much on paid media. As we've expanded into empathy at scale, we're thinking much bigger. Our focus and intent is how do we ultimately connect, but also convert in e-commerce. We focus on having the right idea for consumers, which I think is a big elevation from where we were in fragmented thinking. Our target focuses on beliefs and behaviors rather than just seeing people as demographic clusters or even based on one dimension of location. Our focus is not on how we create a relevant or a customized message, but rather how we create a relevant one. Our media agencies and ultimately publishers, partners, and platforms are much more focused on being partners and enabling in a bigger way. And our scope is broadened into all consumer touch points. And when I'm asked, and I think it was a really good provocation in preparation for today, I was asked, like, what's the big change? What's the big shift? And I think it's this. If I had to boil it down to one thing, when we launched personalization at scale, and something that I worked on really closely with the team at Vayner and thought about, probably because of my media background, I really saw the opportunity for personalization from my time at Twitter in terms of the ability to segment and talk to specific audiences. And I was so amazed with what gaming did. I put audience segments very first in the process. It was like, look, I wanted it in the brief. I wanted it to be upfront. Who are the audience segments we're going for? And it needed to be that far upstream for me. And so I very much thought about what are the segments, what's the data. That led to some thoughts on media connects. And then we thought about messaging by segment. And ultimately, I see a lot of my CPG peers and a lot of marketers going down this path, and it leads to growth. And again, I can go back to slide 2 and say, hey, 25, 35, 30% increase in ROI year over year is awesome. I mean, certainly sets the world on fire and a big change, but it leads to comms by segment, and it leads to something fragmented. I think what we've really changed and redone, and it's a little bit of a back to the future, is really, yes, starting in brand foundations where everything comes from, but we focus on getting to a big idea. And we think about how personalization can unlock empathy. And so when we see a really big idea from our partners, we then really, before we go into any executions, think about what's the insight that can ultimately unlock greater empathy. And our big push here is our goal in empathy at scale, or why we personalize, is not to scale the number of messages, it's to scale our empathy. And putting this back into this logical order has already in the last 6 months had transformational impact on the business. I can point to world-class examples on Milka, Oreo Southeast Asia, Oreo US, Cadbury UK, and you can just see that ultimately resequencing this back and making sure that we're being led by an idea rather than by data and technology, and seeing those as enablers is truly unlocking bigger ideas, bigger comms, and significantly more growth for us as we go forward. To deliver on empathy at scale, things have to change. And I think a lot of marketers are going to be on this journey. I think one is really thinking about your consumer insights. And this has always been a strength for many CPG companies, and something from my time at an agency, I was always in awe of many of my clients at P&G, Kraft, Henkel, and others for just how well they understood the market. But I think it becomes even more important because the world is becoming less homogeneous. More and more, there's quirky different ways. As we showed in our Empathy at Scale video, the different rituals that people have around our brands are fascinating and yet create huge opportunity for us to tap into, and we have to understand those in really new ways. A second thing is it requires us to put ideas before audiences. As I showed on the last slide, there's a resequencing, I think, that has to be done if you're going to get to truly great and brilliant personalization. The third is mastering the craft, the little details that really make the difference and really drive that connection. And it comes down to not only just how we show it, how we shoot it, the production value we do. This has really been at the center of how we've reimagined our entire production agency network last year. Then creating the holistic consumer experiences. So really expanding personalization at scale was very much something we did in paid media. It was something that we did with the Googles and Facebooks of the world and our published partners. But really, as we move to an empathy at scale, we're thinking about it all the way from packaging to product to how we ultimately impact every single comms touch point to make it more relevant and powerful. And I think that expansion in scope has been really empowering for my team as we've reframed from being the media organization to being the consumer experience team. And that's changed our responsibilities, how we work internally, how we engage with other functions, what roles we play with marketers and our agency ecosystems. And then last thing is building and leveraging consumer data. I still believe that the future really belongs to the companies that understand identity. And I think that ultimately at this scale, we're at a stage where we're building data towards an end, towards having a better understanding of our consumers' identity. And it's going to be absolutely critical to get to that one-to-one communication we strive for in a meaningful way at scale. There's many examples that I would point to inside our network that are just great work. I'd like to highlight two of them to you guys. One was, our first one is from Ogilvy and Wavemaker in India. This is work that they did for Cadbury Silk. That's all about how far would you go for love. You can find a lot of these case studies online, and I encourage you to chase them down. And if you're interested in them, you can always email me. I'll help you find the links if you're not able to track it down. But I think just a really good example of work we did this Valentine's Day in India, really tapping into all the different insights of how far people would go and how they express love. And there's certainly a lot written about love languages, and this campaign really brought that idea to life in a contextual way that just, I think everyone could really connect with in India. The second one is the Milka All-Stars, which is a WPP team as well. And this is work that they did for us across Europe. And this is work that really focuses on how we could make the world more tender. Everything from the equity television work they've done through the digital and social connections was really focused on having first a big idea about drawn from our purpose, and then really connecting that on an individual level. And then just some really beautiful work done by the team at WPP that's really making this shine. And then, in terms of what this is delivering, as we shared in our CAGNY presentation, our ROI has been plus 70% versus 2017. Digital is a main driver of that. And we continue to push that overall higher. And we're certainly shooting for $2.70 plus, which is another big jump for us in terms of ROI. But we see clearly that what we delivered in personalization at scale is just the tip of the iceberg. And we're not settled for plus 30. We certainly see that opportunity to put up plus 50s, plus 60s, plus 70s, so that we can continue to push towards what's best in class. And so in closing, what I'd leave before we go to Q&A is, personalization with empathy at scale is really what we believe is personalization made right for snacking made right, which is our company purpose.
Jim, John, thank you very much. I have Jim Parsons from UPS as our first questioner. I want to get to him. I have loads of questions for you, but Jim's an old buddy who's been to many of our summits. I know he's always got great questions. Let me activate him. Jim, you there?
I am, Steve. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, ask your question. How you doing today, Jim? Where are you today?
I am doing well. I'm in Utah. I'm not skiing today, but I am in Utah.
Jim comes to a lot of our summits. Go ahead, Jim.
Hey, Jonathan, it's a pleasure to visit. A quick question for you. How did this, what kind of modifications did this change require in internal roles at Mondelez?
Yeah, I mean, I think it required a few things. First, in terms of roles, it's changed like what the remit of the media team was. So in the past, we had a very traditional CPG media team. We changed that remit to consumer experience, which is a lot more than a shift in terms of what titles were. My team is now tasked with managing a lot of the production agency relationships. We've built a much larger role for the IBS organization, which used to be IT, is now responsible for a lot of shared services, including content production. We've added new people in consumer data. Michael Lampert, who we hired in, is the head of global consumer data. He's on a panel here tomorrow afternoon. Those are roles we just didn't have. And I think that more than anything, you're now starting to have some specialists in consumer data, in our own media space, inside the geographic business units. My team's taking on more. And I also think it's the bigger change is it caused us to think about our agency ecosystem. When you want to do something this complex, you can't have too many partners. You have to simplify in other places. And one of those simplifications, we went from a world and a model where we had 400 plus agency partners and 400 plus production partners. And we've now taken that down where I think our agency network is really, 5 core agencies plus some guest specialists. And our production model is going to 2. And that's, I think, where you have to make some transformational change, because you can't do something like this with 400 partners. The complexity would kill you. And so I think that's where I also see some big change.
John, is the media plan simplifying as well?
It is.
Because you started out by, one of the points you made about personalization is it leads to maybe too much fragmentation. And it sounds like as you're sort of moving back towards this big idea concept and letting creativity drive things more than data, what does that do to the whole media plan? Are you in more places, fewer places?
We're in, I tell you, when we went to personalization scales, when you saw the big shrink. I mean, in the US, we went from 150 to under 10. And that was a big intentional change, again, because you couldn't do it everywhere. And that was, a big shift. And globally, I see that as well. Ultimately, you'll see platforms and you'll see a few specific local partners, who are more specific to a region or a market, like Hotstar in India, for example. And I think that it's, the question is what's your ability to build out complexity once you get going? You know what I mean? And so as a market like the US gets more comfortable and it builds up, I think you're able to expand. But I tell you, the other thing that's kind of the funny part is when we first hired on VaynerMedia in the US to run media, and we were their biggest client, and it was a big landmark shift. I remember just sitting down to look at the flowcharts and just like how we built this out, because we were showing all the segments, all the messaging, and building out phase learning plans across 10 phases. And I had marketing directors who emailed me and go, John, I can't read the flowchart anymore. Like, what's going on? Like, what is this new template? What are we doing? And I looked at it and I go, I don't understand it yet either. I'm like, and I had to get a lot of reps because I was used to a certain format and ways of doing things, and we've overhauled it. And I just think the process has just become fundamentally different. And as we went to empathy at scale, we made another big change in terms of how we were going to do brand building. And I think it was because personalization at scale kind of ran parallel to how we did a lot of our activations. And now we had the chance to rebuild our activation module, and we really embedded it into every template, everywhere we do. It's how we do marketing at Mondelez. It's just fundamentally core to how we build brands in our philosophy. But it was at first certainly a simplification of partners. I think as we get more advanced, we'll be able to branch out from there. But to date, it's become pretty tight. And I think it's about technology. I think just we got so enamored with what we could do that we went and did it. Technology still plays a key role, but I think we just keep it in its proper sequence inside the org. And again, it's not letting it lead the process.
Let me get to a couple of other questions. How are you measuring digital ROI?
Sure, we use Nielsen MMM in a lot of our markets around the world, and we've had a consistent process. In a few select markets, we work with an IRI or someone else, but it's dominantly Nielsen MMM media metrics.
How will Google's changes to cookie blocking and degravitization over the next year impact your personalization and media activation?
I think that, one of the things that I at least appreciate about what Google's announcement was is it was something that's been signaled for a while. And, ultimately, I think they were moving in that direction. They followed through on that. And for the long period of time, we have believed that first party data and second party data were the way to be. And so we have not had a significant investment in third party data. And I think we're well positioned overall where to go. I think that as a CPG company, we have certain opportunities, and certainly in our portfolio, I feel very blessed because we have brands with extremely strong equity that consumers want to engage with. And so when we do things like Cadbury Madberry, where we ask people to pick the new flavors, we get hundreds of thousands of entries, and we get a lot of engagement from that. And it's because we value that relationship and we provide utility. And people are interested in our portfolio, and we leverage that to build our first party data assets.
Let me go back to that video went by really fast, and there seemed to be a bunch of really interesting examples in there. So let me drill back. I wanted to go back to you sort of, you answered it a bit right there with the Cadbury example, this idea of tapping into consumer creativity. What are some good examples of where that's worked well, and the channels that you've used to tap the creativity?
I think there's a few channels that there's, well, again, the blessing of the portfolio. You have a lot of consumers who do a lot of very interesting things. And we tried to showcase it in the video. If anything that you see in that video is dominantly, that wasn't things that we had to go shoot. It was dominantly consumer generated video that we went and licensed because we said, this is really good. It's interesting that people eat it that way. Inside the US, we have a really great social lead in Kelly Amatangelo, who does massive amounts of listening, and she is constantly sending us stuff. Whether I like the work on Ritz. I think everyone has a brand and people love Oreo, but I love Ritz. And every year at Thanksgiving, people build these giant football stadiums out of Ritz crackers and meats and cheeses and the whole 9 yards. And so I think you just see a lot of it come in. We see a lot of that engagement, and we've had success with Nutter Butter. Nutter Butter is a brand we put very little working media behind. I don't think anyone here has probably seen any of our working media, but using social communities and TikTok, as well as Pinterest and other platforms, and also Twitch, they've just done some amazing work. And we get a lot of engagement off of that. And so I think dominantly you see that in platforms. There's also just really good opportunities. Selectively, we've done some influencer work, more prominently, oddly enough, in Russia, India, and Europe than anywhere else. In China, certainly we do a lot in China with KOLs, but I've just seen more of it there than part of our US model. And it's because each market has a different way of cracking it.
Why is that, do you think?
I think in India, there's just huge push behind that. In Russia, they have a lot of passion for it. In the US, it's just been less part of our overall portfolio. I think that we're blessed with a bunch of really good ideas we want to go activate. And it's something that is always on our list. But like many CPG companies, I think you are blessed with a lot of ideas. I think inside the US model, we're very focused on what we take on. And I think that is one of our strengths, and why the team in the US is some of our best marketers in the world. They're very focused on saying, what's our plan? What will we extend to? What will we do? And there have been big pushes in multicultural marketing going back to 2017. I would argue we lead in a lot of those spaces. I think there was a big push around building out our social communities. And I think influencers is part of our roadmap, but we take on a very disciplined approach to think about what's right. And we don't try and do everything at once. And I think that's a real testament to the leadership in the US, that they're able to stay that focused. Because I'm all over the board. And so they're usually the ones who are like, John, there's a sequence. This is what we do. Then we do this. And when you want to do something big like personalization, you have to really put a lot of these other things on hold to do this well.
Let me ask a very media post question.
Sure.
More TV, less TV? In the end, that
Less,
platform
less
that
TV.
CPGs
Yeah,
have
yeah,
always
no, 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 less
relied on
TV.
for brand
Got it.
building, and since you
Less
said you're
TV.
changing your approach to brand building, ultimately
Less
net
TV.
net, where's the budget changed? And is
Less
TV,
TV.
what role does TV play in this?
There's less TV. I would say that, like, for the first time ever last year, globally, we spent more money in digital than television. And that's really significant given our high index to international markets and particularly emerging markets. So last year, we were spent more money in digital than television, and that's a continuing path. And I think there's a few things that really drive that. One is the high ROIs that we're able to achieve in digital. I think part of it is the amount of people that you're able to reach in television, and television will continue to play a key role. And I think there's certain things that, as you talked about in your opening, we're certainly enamored with. I think we are very passionate about the NCAA tournament because it's an opportunity for us to partner with retailers and put together exciting programs for consumers. The Olympics is another one that we're looking forward to later this year, which was delayed from last year. But increasingly, I think you see the opportunity in commerce pushes us more into digital. I think the high returns in digital, and ultimately the consumer guides us there. Now, some of that will end up being CTV, OTT, and a lot of those pieces, but I think increasingly it is more digital, and there's no doubt. Globally will probably be in the high 50s this year, which is a pretty good move. But it's based on returns and ultimately where the consumers are moving.
Let me, I've got a long question here. Personalization at scale is often brought after the big idea has been created and retrofitted into digital. With empathy at scale being brought further upstream, do you face any challenges changing this thought process with creative agencies, typically those that can be a bit more traditional with a TV focus?
I have not had, I tell you what, I think part of what helped me there is when I launched Personalization at Scale. Again, at that time, I was responsible for media, digital, and data. And then 2 years ago, I was given the additional responsibility of creative agencies. And Empathy at Scale was born of a conversation with my creative agencies. And it was a really good two-way dialogue because, again, I can tell you, David Bosco at VCCP, everyone should be blessed to have an account guy like him, because I literally sat down to dinner to talk to him about it. I came in pissed. I was like, why can't we get this right? And all you guys do is television. He's like, listen, that's bullshit. Let's talk about what's going on here. He goes, one, no one in CPG has done this because ultimately services do personalization. All the best work is services. It's Airbnb, it's Nike, which is a product turned into a service. It's this. If you want to do this, you need to invest in creative exploration. And so we agreed on a project. It was Mondelez funded with Google, and we did a creative exploration project that explored how we do personalization in the era of in the sector of CPG, and that netted a lot of really interesting ideas on Cadbury. It's led to the work that you see now with the Cadbury egg hide, which is VCCP done, which is being blown up around the world. And I think the best thing we've done in digital is right now what that work is from VCCP. And I would tell you, I think when you bring agencies along and you set that expectation, and my boss, who's the CMO, has been super clear with the agencies about it. And when that's what you reward and that's what you drive, you will get that work. And I'd say they've been brilliant partners in it. I've been really thrilled, and I don't think I have an agency on the roster who cannot excel at that. And I have work to show from all of them saying that they can do it. And now we're just keep pushing the bar higher and higher.
And one wrap question, one thing we haven't talked about is product development and new brands. What's the relationship between, Empathy at Scale, you've been talking about a lot of very familiar brands here, but as you lean forward into developing new brands, what's the role of this process there?
Well, I think that as you launch new brands, and we have examples where we've launched new products, perhaps under a brand, I'd have to think if I have an example of where we've totally launched a new brand. I don't think we have, but I think the principles remain the same. Ultimately, we are trying to build a connection between the brand and consumers. And I think the way to do that is not through some mass message. Again, I go back to the idea that the world is less homogeneous. If we were to go back to the 1950s, 1960s, what would have looked like weird, there were very few outliers, and what was weird by today's standard is nothing close to weird. And I just believe that over time, the world has become more heterogeneous. And as a result, this is why this type of marketing works. is because the world is less homogeneous, and you can see some clear sociographics around that. You can see the success of things like Amazon with the endless cart to be able to point to that. And I think you see it here in CPG marketing. If you look at any of your products, there are quirky uses and people are quirky, and there's a lot of different reasons why people snack. If we want to be the true leader in that, we're going to have to really solve a lot of those needs.
Or we've always been this quirky. We just didn't have the means to really unearth it and see it in ourselves and use it. But
that's a fair thesis too. That's worth exploring.
The age of mass. Obviously, we're seeing that next stage where digitization has thoroughly undermined and brought us beyond the age of mass communication and mass media. John Halvorson, thank you so much. This was a great opening, some great ideas here. And we hope to see you back again soon.
Thank you. Thanks so much, and have a great rest of the conference. I'll be looking forward to listening in.